So I appreciate the opportunity to speak about, this is the J.A. CRESAP. It is the last surviving wooden-hauled vessel of its kind, and it's the last Clarington-built vessel that is in existence. So with that, I'm going to begin with the sort of the background, and I'm going to transition to Gary here shortly, and we'll take you kind of through the history of it and what our plans are. So Clarington's boat building past began about 1879. There were three Mazzina brothers, Marshall, Dennis, and Henry, and they bought land on the north end of Clarington, which their father Lewis had also built steamboats. So they came into this with a knowledge of how they were built and continued that tradition on. Mazzina brothers, if you're familiar with it, they built barges, they built packet boats, ferries, they even built yachts and skiffs. And they did rebuilds as well. So even if the boat wasn't being built there, they rebuilt them. So over 200 boats were built there between 1879 and 1940 in Clarington. This picture is a very rare photo, and I'm sorry for the quality, but it's not much better even with Photoshop. This is actually the Jewel being rebuilt around 1906, and as you can see, this here is a splash. She's actually being launched at the minute the photo was snapped. And I'm sorry that you can't see it, but also it's hard to see. But over here along the bank is also her wheel sitting up on the bank, waiting to be reinstalled once she's back in the water. So this would have been on the north end of Clarington. This photo was taken about early 1920s, and it shows a group of the Mazzina brothers and the cooks, and my great-great-grandfather, Elmer Thomas, who I'll talk about here shortly. But this behind them is a typical wooden-hauled barge that they would be building. And this yard of particular size, it had its own steam machinery. It had its own sawmill. They pretty much had everything they needed to begin a steamboat from start to finish. So some of the boats that were built in Clarington, the Avalon, which was the original Avalon from 1898. The City of Wheeling, which my family built in 1899. This was actually her day that they were going to tow her to Wheeling. And if you don't know about the City of Wheeling, this was the largest boat built at Mazzina Brothers Yard, and it was the last steamboat completed at Wheeling at that time period. And it began operations in 1900. I'm sorry. And of course, a lot of you are familiar with the steamer Liberty, which we have several artifacts here at the museum. That was probably the most famous boat built, and it ran until the late 1930s up the Muskingum. But my great-great-grandfather also was master ships builder on this vessel as well. So that leads us up to the 1920s, and railways were becoming prominent. We were experiencing new growth in the country, so this is the only known photo of the CRESAP after she was built in Clarington. This was when she was brand new. The boat was started in 1923. This photo was actually taken in 1924. And you can see she's a fairly common vessel. There's nothing real fancy about her. She's a workboat. Let me go back here briefly. Most people associate an engine on this boat would be in the stern, but actually when this boat was built, she had a 40 horsepower St. Mary's engine. You can see the skate stack here. The engine was positioned here in the front, and Gary can probably talk more about the technical side of that when he presents his side of this. But that's where we kind of begin with this story. So in 1923, Cook Brothers and Thomas began this vessel, and a long time has passed with books and other historical content showing that it was built at Mazzina Brothers, and I'm going to get into where that changed and what we found. But it was designed and constructed by Elmer Thomas, Charlie Cook, Arthur, who they called Ott Cook, and Henry Mazzina. And again, like I said, the boatyard, it had its own steam-operated sawmill, it had a planer and bandsaw, and it had other woodworking machinery. So this is my great-great-grandfather, and he was born 1871 in Clarington and began, his family had built and worked on steamboats, and he just continued that tradition. As you see there, I have a photo of an order book, which I'm going to get into, but this order book ended up being his daily journal. And I found that only after the boat, I got involved with actually getting and acquiring the boat for our museum. But this book tells a lot of the history of the boat we're talking about. So here's an entry from 1923, and it says here, April 19th, started Joe CRESAP boat, gas haul completed, including deck, forward, and hog chains, and it was $800 at that time. That was the down payment. For a custom-built boat, I mind you. So on May 5th, 1923, and you can kind of see how fast things progress here, started Joe CRESAP coal flat. Henry Ott worked all day on it. Charles and I worked on Joe's gas boat. So they had one crew working on the actual towboat, one crew working on the flat that would accompany it. So here we're up to June of 23. He's already logging the time on the vessel. So the time on the CRESAP flat was 482 and a half hours, and the contract at that point owed $450. So
his handwriting was really good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the journal even talks about other boats. So they, for a small boatyard, they had a lot of different things going on, but this seemed to be the primary focus. And at this point in time, Mazzina Brothers had sold out, which we revealed through this journal. Mazzina Brothers had sold out to Cook Brothers and Thomas, and Thomas being my great-great-grandfather. And for years we didn't know that because there was really no documentation on it, but we have found that now. So we kind of corrected the record to say that this boat was actually built at Cook Brothers and Thomas and not at Mazzina Brothers. But the same people that worked at Mazzina Brothers were employed, so. So here's July 3rd through the 5th. There was kind of a lull. There wasn't much detail about the boat, but we fast forward over a year, and it says Ott and I caulking, Charles and I'm not sure what that last one was, but might be Warren. Yeah, finishing decks on CRESAP. Ott and I finished caulking. Charles and Warren finished decks and all launched boat. So that was on July 3rd through the 5th. And on July 7th, Ott finished Joe CRESAP today, and that's when the boat was delivered. So you can kind of get a sort of an idea of what it took for a small boatyard to construct and put it together, a vessel of this size, and throughout the entire process. So this was a rendering that I did just briefly on the computer because I was trying to put together. So the day it left Clarington, this would have been basically what it looked like. Its collar scheme and the coal flat, the barge that went with it. So this is what was essentially paid for roughly $2,000 in 1924. And I did not sit down to calculate what that would be in today's but so one of the interesting stories that I actually have before I turn this over to Gary is that a gentleman in Hannibal, Ohio, who's still alive, he's in his late 80s, his name's Captain Jack Heyer, and some of you might be familiar with him. He recalls as a young boy after the Crane brothers, the Crane family in Pittsburgh, bought this vessel. Like I said, she only had a 40 horsepower gas engine, which isn't a lot of power for a vessel of this size, but he remembers as going to Pittsburgh with his father, and at that point it was renamed the Skipper, and I believe it was in 1945 or 46 when he was there. And he said he was a young boy, he stood on a milk crate to look out over the window, and he said, we were trying to get up the Allegheny, but we couldn't, so they backed it up because the hull was shaped enough to where the power of the engine would pull her better going backwards than they could shove it going forward. And he distinctly remembered that. So he's been a very interesting character to have around at our, when we're actually working on this boat, and we'll get into that a little more. So with that, I think I can turn it over to Gary now, where the boat leaves Clarington and becomes, its next line in the career, its next career from there.
One, thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to address you tonight. I really appreciate it. Connie and I have been off and on, attending for years, but always try to make it. It's a great event, always good to see a lot of friends, and always good to know that I'm with people that might not think I'm completely crazy because they have some of the same passions, okay? So this is one of my favorite shots of the Louise, which is the CRESAP as I knew her in most of my life. This is a Bud Daly shot taken at Lock 10 on the Ohio, which is odd. Lock 10 on the upper Mississippi is where I grew up and where the boat spent most of the time when Connie and I owned her. There we go. So I wanted to start with what was I thinking? One of the things that I'm going to ask you all to bear with me on is I have a lot of slides. I'm going to go quick. And part of the reason I'm doing this is mostly where my head is at, because I think most people are going to go, how long have y'all had this boat? And if you go look at it today, you got to go, what the hell did you do all those years? So there was a period of time where she looked a lot different. So one of my missions tonight is to show that part to you. So I'll try not to be defensive, but I think it's important you see that. So what was I thinking? One, I wanted a stern wheel boat. Two, initially, this was a little naive at the time, especially for a guy in the passenger boat business. I wanted to set up an excursion boat business, and the thought was the Louise would probably never get certificated for that, although I did have a Coast Guard certificate of documentation, but it was going to be a passenger barge, so that didn't last long, but anyway. Second, I did say that. I wanted to also have a stern wheel boat just to cruise the river. So if the excursion boat business was out, at least we'd be coming up here for the Stern Wheel Festival and that kind of thing, all right? And the big thing was to preserve such a rare piece of history. I did a lot of homework on this and realized that there were really only 3 wood-hull stern wheel riverboats still in existence. It was the Pearson, which was named the Wilkie up in Winona, and the Lone Star in LeClaire, Iowa. So this thing was way more rare than I really anticipated. Where am I pointing? I guess I need to go here, right? So a little bit about how I might have got this bug. So my grandfather ran a button factory in my hometown. And although, in Guttenberg, Iowa, although I didn't see this, it predated me, I saw those pictures and heard him talk about it, because by that time they had fished all the mussels out of the upper Mississippi and they were buying barge loads of shells from the Tennessee River. So I don't know if the bug came from here, but a lot of time was spent on the river and at the button factory. So we saw that. So a little bit about what I picked up from some clippings that Bud Daly had sent me on the CRESAP. Is that she actually hauled some lumber up for the construction of Lock 4 on the Allegheny, one of her early trips. This article was in the Waterways Journal, and it said that Joe CRESAP was ill, and Bob Thomas actually ran that trip to take the lumber up. And then they brought some stuff back to the state penitentiary in Moundsville. Also something I didn't know until just recently, and I don't know if this is verified, but that it did have a gas engine. It was a Foos, F-O-O-S engine, and then it was later changed to a St. Mary's diesel big 40 horse. So the transition, Crane Brothers bought the boat, I believe, it was in 1943. And I don't know much about the early years. I know that when Crane Brothers bought it, they renamed her to Skipper, which is the nickname for Cliff Crane, and she had that name until Bud Daly bought her, actually. So Crane Brothers had her for just a few years. 1946, Leroy Koss bought her and ran her as a ferry boat. A report is that she went through a substantial rebuild. One of the things I learned over the years is wood boats take an awful lot of maintenance, constant. And I mean, you'll see that in this, so much of the work that we did, you had to redo it. We owned the boat long enough, I redid it a couple times. So Leroy passed away in 1967, and that's when Bud Daly bought the boat. So here's a few pictures of the Skipper. I'm thinking that was the Leroy rebuild. So I think all the work went into the hull because it didn't go into paint there. So it's a shot of him in the pilot house. And there's a ferry boat. I don't know if anybody over here has ever heard of that or run in or saw it. Anybody old enough for that? Okay, so the next step was to Bud and Eileen Daly, who many of you know. They were always a big part of this group, Toronto, Ohio. Bud named the boat Louise after Eileen's mother, which was always a smart move. And I think, so Bud, pushed barges locally, hauled some construction equipment, and we met them here and became great friends. And Bud gave me a lot of information on the boat, how she ran, and different tips and advice over the years. So it was really great to get to know them. So here's some of the pictures. It was a dinner bucket boat. Nobody stayed. There were no cabins. They just went to work daytime, brought their lunch, and worked the boat. So she hauled a variety of equipment. This is a picture. Bud Daly is supposedly back there in the pilot house, and that's Bob Markle of the Showboat Clan standing there in front of the pilot house. A little article about him from the Waterways Journal at the time. So there's Bud and Eileen, for those of you who remember them. I'll never forget, I went to visit them at their house, and they were not tall people. They were like they came off a wedding cake. And Bud had designed the entire house for them. And you go in there, and the kitchen counter was incredible. I mean, it was designed for people who were 5 feet tall. So you walked, it was like Gulliver's Travels when you went in the house. So this is something I missed out on. Later, this is the Louise bell, or the bell off the CRESAP. And when Bud sold the boat, he kept the bell and he mounted it in front of the house. And as we became closer, at some point he said, I want you to have that bell and put it on the boat. And it was one of those things where, yep, great, thanks, we'll get it someday. And I actually missed out on it. And Bud had passed away, and I had talked to Eileen some years later, and she said that her grandson wanted the bell. And I told Taylor about it. Hopefully we can still marry the bell up with the boat, because I didn't have any contact info, but hopefully it gets back to the boat at some point. So when Bud sold the boat, it went to Florida. And Bud changed the name to Louise, and she had that name until really coming back home to Clarington, right? So she had the Louise name for a long, long time. So a gentleman named Tom Corley out of Panama City, Florida, bought the boat, and his son is still a surveyor down there. I never did hitch up with them, but they had a business and pushed barges on the Apalachicola River, and on the trip down, there was a picture in the Vicksburg paper where she actually tied up next to the Sprague. So when I think she was in Florida for about 2 years or so, and then a gentleman named Clyde Ryberg bought her. Clyde was a Minnesota guy. He took the boat up to Chaska, Minnesota, up on the Minnesota River, and there was a report in the local paper, and he had a rough time. So when they brought the boat across on the Gulf, he did a hand crank on the engine. The crank kicked back, knocked him in the head, got stitches. The differential failed, the chain drive, the right angle part. Above Dubuque, he ran into a stump field, tore off the rudders, and damaged the paddle wheel. And the comment was that he traveled 6,000 miles to make the 2,000-mile trip. He paid $7,500 for the boat, and he said it cost him $10,000 to get it there. And I always say I may have a little prejudice, but this is when the boat went from commercial service to private use, and he basically turned it into a houseboat. And he's the guy that moved the boat aft. It was forward, so the boat was trimmed, and he moved the boat aft, so she always sat heavy at the stern after that. She was not designed that way. And he's also the guy, I say, that made the biggest mistake. So you got a wood hull boat, and she must have been leaking bad. So instead of doing the proper repair, he foamed it. And that'll buy you some time. but it's the worst thing you can do for a boat, because after a number of years, that foam becomes like a sponge. So now you've got a big wet hull that never dries out, the wood rots faster, and she sits low in the water. So it's amazing to me that she survived that. Whoops. So the next move was Steve and Kathy Buteau. And they were a young couple who graduated from the University of Minnesota. They got jobs and were teaching at the University of Iowa. And they had the boat tied up in Muscatine, Iowa, Lock 16 for a couple years. And then they got jobs in Winona, Minnesota. And they had the boat up on Frog Slough. The first time I saw the Louise is when she went through my hometown. I just happened to be there. I'd already moved away, and I saw this boat go through. She landed there briefly, and I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. And you could tell at that time she was sitting very low in the water, and the port side stern, which has been notorious for hogging down, was really low in the water. But anyway, they had a little baby that they raised on the boat. They were in Winona for a couple years, and the way the story was, they tried to sell the boat. There weren't any takers, and Bob can talk about this more maybe at the bar later, but I know he and Lexi Palmore looked at the boat, had enough sense to stay away from it. I was not quite that smart. So Steve and Kathy were unable to sell the boat. They weren't going to give up these jobs in Hawaii, so they donated the boat to the Winona County Historical Society. And they told them, the boat leaks badly, you need to pump it once or twice a day. They said, okay, got it. Well, they don't work weekends. And so Steve and Kathy take off to Hawaii, and a few days later the boat sinks. So it was really unfortunate. So I've got a few pictures of the Buteau years. So these were kind of like hippie days, I think, for the Louise. So that's the inside the starboard bow. They had a pot-bellied stove inside. I went to Winona shortly after that, and there was a big community of boathouses there. People just living behind the island. There must have been 40, 50 of them. So this is what happened 3 days after they left. So I don't know what the timing was or how long she was down. They mobilized a local marina guy who didn't really know too much. And they did get her raised, and they took a towboat and just shoved her up on the sandbar across from the city front in Winona. They tore off the rudders in the process. I mean, it was just like brute force to get her up on the bank. And she sat there for quite some time, was vandalized. Things were really beat up and torn apart. There was a small fire in it at some point, so it's amazing the boat survived that. So that's what she looked like. Interesting enough, the Delta Queen in the background. So this is where we come on the scene. So it's unbelievable to me when I put this together. It was that long ago. So in 1980, I charged in there going, oh, hell yeah, we can do this. And I should have listened to Bob and Lexi more. But so we took over ownership of the boat. The city immediately said, this thing is an eyesore, it needs to get off the beach. And I had to work with the city and plead my case with them, and they gave me a reprieve because they were just going to come in, and the first thing was take possession. And then, so I went to a couple city council meetings, and they all said, well, I don't think we want to take possession, really, if you can get this thing out of there for us. So the big mission was to start work and dig her out of the sand and replace what was rotten, which was quite a lot. Honestly, the whole port side had no strength left. The beams were rotten. When I went up there, I was living in this tent, and I was there for maybe 2 weeks. And Captain Walter Carneth comes up, who Bob and I worked with, great guy. And second-generation steamboat pilot. He comes over. He was getting around on 2 canes. God damn it was every 4 words was God damn it. And he goes, what are you doing? Where are you staying? I said, well, right here. And he said, God damn it, you can't do that. You're staying with us. So I ended up living with the Carnus for a while. And it was incredible because Cap had built and rebuilt wood boats and barges at the Corps of Engineers yard. He was a pilot, but during the winter and the off season, they would build and rebuild boats and barges. So he taught me everything there was to know about building and rebuilding wood boats. And I learned so much from him, and I had no electricity. So there was, for a while I had a generator later on, but I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have any power. And he said, hell, we didn't have any power when I was doing this. It didn't stop him. He didn't flinch. He could do anything with wedges and levers and rollers, you name it. So we started there. This is what she looked like once we got her out of the stand a little bit, and you can see, the beam at the bottom. The bottom beam was 6 by 16, one piece, 65 feet long. Wow. I counted the annual rings. That tree started growing in 1796. I don't know what neighborhood it came from. Maybe not too far. It was a Douglas fir, actually. But so this is all the work we did in Winona just to be able to get her ready, to get her off the beach and move down to my hometown, Lock 10. So it was a pretty big chore. A lot of friends and family, which has really been one of the things that kept us going all these years, all the time. Helped out a lot, and we had some local help, and we did all this work. Let me go through some of this stuff. That's Captain Carneth. So he was getting around on 2 canes, but if you gave him a stool and a chair, he did more stuff in his shop for me. And as long as he could sit down, he'd stay working. So we took the rotten beams out of the port side. I didn't have access to, money, one thing, but good lumber. So I got 10 by 20 beams from a house mover, and they were tearing down the railroad depot in Winona at the time, and I got beams from the roof rafters, and that's what we rebuilt the port side with. So I went in with used lumber, Taylor, so that's why it looks so bad now. Anyway, so we had a setback. So Connie and I were living in New Orleans, so we got a boat in Minnesota, and we're 1,000 miles away. I've never lived closer to the boat than 350 miles, so that's one of the downsides of a project like this. So we had high water, and the boat drifted down a little bit, but the tough thing was the blocking washed out. So all that support was gone. All the planks just kind of spread out. And because the hull was facing upstream, the inside was just solid drift. So it took us forever to get all the little twigs and sticks out of there. One thing I forgot to mention too, the entire hull was foamed. So that goes in as a liquid, it's sprayed. So the first thing we had to do to even get at the hull to do the work was dig out piece by piece all of that styrofoam. That was a huge project. So this is just some of the stuff, the beams again. The planks are held in place with 60-penny 6-inch spikes, 4 per plank. So you take this is a Captain Carneth thing, you can't use the old holes, you got to plug them. So we ended up whittling all these little plugs to plug the old holes, and then in addition to that, we had to obviously put in new spikes, so we drilled smaller holes, drove those in. I had a couple of friends from Wisconsin come up. These guys worked on the railroad, and I thought, perfect, railroad guys, they're all over this. So they drove spikes for maybe an hour, and they were done. And I said, geez, guys, I thought 2 railroad guys would be able to drive spikes. And they said, well, we can, but we do it this way. They're not used to going this way. So I wore out that help pretty quickly. So there's Connie learning a new trade. So a lot of people came up over the years and helped. Lexi Palmer did signboards and some caulking. So we got the boat launched, and a good friend from my hometown, Walt Webster, his dad had a houseboat, so Walt volunteered to be the towboat, and we pushed the Louise backwards 140 miles down to Guttenberg through 4 locks, and it was a great trip, actually. So that's Connie and I delivering the boat. We look the same. So just a couple things quick. A funny thing, early on, I should have followed through on this because I thought, okay, this is going to take some money, way more than I thought. I told Connie, we ought to call the boat Lamborghini because we could each have one if I had put that money in somewhere else. But I wanted to find out how rare it was to try and get some grant money in that. So I had never met Captain Way, and I certainly knew his reputation and people that knew him and friends. So I call him up out of the blue, and I knew it was Fred. He said, "This is Fred Way," and I knew it was something like Fred Way Jr. And I said, "Is Fred Way Sr. there?" And he was so gracious. He said, "I think I'm probably the guy you want to talk to," and he just let it go. So between Captain Way and Jim Swift, they said, "No, this thing, you're one of three that are left." So I really got a feel for just how rare the boat was. So just a quick rundown in our ownership, and this is where the kids had college loans. We had to move her several times, and I think if I didn't have a job and just stayed focused on the project, I probably would have gotten there. But living 1,000 miles away, and then later we moved to St. Louis, still a 6-hour drive. Work was every vacation. Anytime I could take off, we went up, and we ran out of properties to keep the boat on different times. So I hauled her out of the water. We built our own marine ways and hauled her out with 2 D9 Cats in Guttenberg. And then the city was building a marina, so we had to move to private property. We did most of the work at Nordic Forge, and then they were expanding their horseshoe factory there. So we had to move her, and I put her in the water. So each of those moves was a house mover, because there's no other really easy way to get the boat in and out. So we made a lot of moves with this thing over the years. And of course, I look at that as money that didn't go into the hull and other parts of the boat. So that's the first move. This is just some of the stuff that when I got to the first shoreside lot, this is the cylinder timber, back end was rotten. This is the starboard side. Those beams are all held in with drift bolts like you see there. But all that wood was just kind of mush and putty. There we removed the cylinder timber. So this is some of the work we did. Starboard side all emptied out. Built new rudder stocks, new rudders. So that's what they should look like, Taylor, and I know they don't look like that now, but they were there at one point in time. Anybody that knew Pete Feelhauer from Delta Queen days, Pete's machine shop remachined the paddle wheel bearings and the new pins and supports and bearings for the rudders. This is the lumber on the starboard side was new. We bought Weyerhaeuser in St. Paul, had 40-foot long timbers that were 24 by 24, and they cut whatever you need. So we bought new lumber for the starboard side. New deck frames, new headlog, new planking, new bits at the bow. The old paddle wheel was in pretty rough shape, so I built a stand. We took that off and started setting up to build a new wheel. This is the move from the horseshoe factory back in the water. New roof beams, all of that was rotten. So new roof beams, and then it was 1x3 tongue and groove fir decking that went down for the roof. We talked about plywood because it was a lot cheaper, but it wasn't authentic. I tried to do an accurate restoration, but still do some changes that were going to make the boat, I guess I'll say, practical for use and upkeep. New studs and siding, new pilot house. So I've got some, so you see how long we've been at this. So this was every family vacation. So one of the things Bud Daly told me, I asked him about letting her ice in, and he said, no, you can let her ice in. And I think conditions on the upper Mississippi were different than the Ohio, because what I found, it's colder, the ice is in longer. I was in a slack water area, and what I found over the years is the ice, it took a few years, but it started working the hull. That pressure started loosening up the side beams, which caused me trouble because I had the boat tied up in a heavy wind. Then the beams would kind of open up a little bit. I had automatic pumps, but That's one of the things that hurt me is a heavy wind and waves and the stress on those beams, and a seam opens up and the pumps can't keep up. So she was leaking, and we took her down to Newt Marine, another trip with Walt's houseboat. That was only 40 miles, and did a dry dock. So I want to read something here because David Shigfrey came out and helped. We sent a flyer out to kind of solicit all of our friends. Used to be that when I'd go back home, all my friends would show up, bring a few beers, go to work. Well, after years and years and years, I found I'd show up in town, nobody to be seen. You know, it's like, okay, you've worn me out. So here's something David sent for S&D. Reading about the building of wooden hull steamboats sounds so romantic, but you really get a different perspective lying on your back with a wooden mallet and a wedge pounding yard after yard of oiled hemp. So it's pretty accurate. So this was really the best time for the boat. We had done so much work on the upper works. We did a lot of hull work. I think we replaced 15 bottom planks, and I got cypress from Louisiana for it. And we were feeling pretty good about it. So there's some of the delivery crew sitting there at the table, all but the guy in the red shirt. So one of the funny things with this Christian, our oldest, came out to help. The other kids were too young, and he was going to caulk, and I felt like underneath was too hard for a 12-year-old. So I said, Christian, why don't you go and catch the side of the boat, and you can just work on the side like Camp McCarthy was doing. So we're all working away, and we pulled a couple of all-nighters, and it must have been 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And I was getting tired, hadn't thought about it. He comes around, I'd totally forgotten about him. He comes in, it's like 11 or 12, and he goes, Dad, I'm really tired. And I'm going, I can't believe, where have you been? And he said, can I just go in the car and sleep? I don't think I had seen him for 4 or 5 hours. I just kind of left him over there by himself. So we get a lot of stories about child abuse. So this is how she looked after coming out of the dry dock. And like I said, she was in the best shape ever. The next visit up was going to be, put the engine in. I actually, I'll get into that a little bit. I regret this. The later engine was a Cat D8800. One of the problems I had, if she was leaking in winter, the bottom would leak, you'd ice on the inside, and the boat would get heavier. You couldn't pump it out, and it just started making ice. And I was afraid I was going to lose her one year, and I ended up pulling the engine out, and I should have kept it. I scrapped that engine, and I regret it, because it, especially now. But I needed to get the weight out of there. I was going to have a boat down surrounded by 18 inches of ice and no way to get her out, and I felt the topside would have been crushed. But so I was ready to build the paddle wheel, get that back. I had all the pieces cut and put an engine in. I had a brand new 15 kW generator in her. So one of the things, winter work was great because I was closer to the boat to do all the work. So this is Christian and Anton, who spent a Christmas day helping me dig ice out of the hull, because it was at that same time, as the boat was getting lower and lower. I'm leaking, I couldn't stop the leaks. So we spent an entire Christmas day chipping ice out and getting it off just to lighten the boat up a little bit. So some people over the years, Captain Holly came by to visit, and he's doing great, by the way. I saw him about a week ago. I had other friends and mentors, if anybody recognizes Tom Dunn helping out with the paddle wheel there. Yeah, there you go. So, and like I said, my sister Jane dresses up to go to the bathroom. So she probably hates me for that picture, but I got Connie's parents down below, my mother, my aunt and uncle. I've gone through 3 generations of people on this boat. But I've had so many friends and family just help out. A few shots of the kids. Christian used to come up. He would fish literally all day. He'd be there 8 or 10 hours, and I'd take him home at night, and I'd always be angry if he caught fish, because then I'd have to clean him at 11 o'clock. That's Rose down below vacuuming. So I think I kind of went through this. So when we were so close, And that next spring, I came up when the ice came out, and I looked and I see the bottom planks at the stern hanging off. What had happened is muskrats made a dugout canoe out of the stern log. So that meant I'm done. I'm a year away from dry dock, just out of it. And I was going to have to haul it again. I'd have to pull the rudders, the cylinder timbers, and all that to replace that. It was an 8 by 10 or 12 piece of oak at the stern. And it just stopped me in my tracks. And it was like, okay, we need to regroup. We need to rebuild the budget and go back at it. And that was really the beginning of the decline, I guess I'll say. So I don't know how I jumped that in there so quick. So one of the things, I guess I'll jump to this. I don't know what the next slide is now, but one of the things, when it got to be, okay, we can't do this anymore. I said, I'm out of time, I'm out of money. The guy that owned the property where the boat was on, I did haul it out later on, but that owned the property where the boat was on was selling it. I had to leave. And Connie was ready to throw in the towel. It's like, okay, I just don't think we can keep up with this project anymore. And like I said, it was a killer financially. So Taylor had expressed some interest in the boat, and I thought, what better place to be? One of the things I wanted to do was make sure she was preserved. And he had a barge lined up, which would have been great, slide the boat on. That fell through, couldn't get the barge up for high water, and we ended up, he found a trucking firm. But in order to do that, I had to take off the pilot house, the hog chains, the cylinder timbers, the rudders, and cut the outer decks and the roof off just to make it fit to do the land transport to get it here. So that was difficult. I hated to do that, but it was the only way to make her survive, right? So, I missed a few shots here. I'm sorry. What hit me is the boat started leaking bad. I was working for Entertainment Cruises. I'm giving a class for captains in New York. The guy that was working for me, taking care of it, calls me up, and I always knew that was a bad thing. And it was in March, and the boat went down, and the river was coming up. I couldn't get there for 3 days. Newton Marine came up with me, and we had 6-inch pumps, couldn't get her up. So she was down halfway up on the pilot house for a month and a half. And that really killed it. That's what put her in the shape she's in now, with the whole roof rotted away. And once the river went down, it took me an hour to get it up off the bottom. So we hauled it to a lot, and it kind of chipped away at a little bit of work, but not a lot got done after that. So anyway, what have I learned? Don't get a job where you work 80 hours a week, because I travel all the time, I work all the time, and this is a project for somebody that's got a little more time. Live close to your boat if you're going to tackle a project like this. Apply for grants. Not much, I still want a stern wheel boat. And family and friends are the most important thing no matter what you do. I can't tell you, whether it's my mother, you can talk to the people at the table to see how this has affected their lives, whether it's dinner or where's Gary or are we going up to the boat again this year and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, this is what I really needed all along. So that never happened. So back to what was I thinking? I wanted a stern wheel boat. I got it, okay? Set up an excursion business. No, that didn't make any sense anyway. Cruise the river with my own stern wheel boat. No, but at least I'm still married. Preserve a historic riverboat. Achievable. We're almost there, thanks to Taylor. So, thank you very much.
Okay, so this is where we pick up in Hannibal, Ohio. So Guttenberg to Iowa, it's about an 800-mile journey. So if you thought Gary was crazy, you met Gary 2.0, because then I became involved. And I'm not ashamed to admit it, because I'm used to being crazy. My wife and I bought a church for $1, and we weren't married at the time, but I decided I was going to turn that into a house. So she trusted me, and after 3 years, we made it into our home. And then I no sooner than moved into it in June of that year, and in November, surprise, honey, I got another project for us. Gary and I, through email, phone calls, as he said, we tried to we had a boat, a barge lined up. We had a plan in place, but the high water got in the way, so we were out of time. And I said, "What about a trucking company?" And Gary was able to go through and figure out where he literally needed to cut to get the boat to fit the regulations to be, transported from basically every interstate, and they had to basically calculate every turn, every crossway, every light, every electric line, the whole length. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm pressing the wrong. Oh, nope, did it again. So, with $30,000, which were raised by several generous donors, and a quick plan thrown together, Gary and I, and it turned out we had planned to try to move this, I believe, what was it, Gary, September or October? And we kept having to reach out. Gary had to get a welder in place so they could basically weld in some additional support so it could be, secured to the bed of the trailer. Then we had to wait for the house moving company that we hired to get the boat moved, and then we had to hire the trucking company. So $30,000 later, we get the boat loaded, and we're off to the races. So at that point in time, I'm on a flight to London. I'm sitting in an airport, my wife and I, and we're on our way to London, and Gary messages me and says we're ready to move. And so we land in London, and we're there for 3 days, and then we're hopping on Queen Mary 2 for a westbound crossing to New York. So my entire vacation that November, all the way across the Atlantic, was logging onto the internet and seeing what was happening with Gary and everybody else. So we arrive in New York Harbor at 6 a.m. and they're arriving that day. They're en route. They had left 2 days prior, and I was notified out in the middle of the Atlantic. So I'm short of asking the captain to speed up. I'm like, how in the hell am I going to get home in time to meet this boat? So we get into New York, we get off the ship, we grab our baggage, we basically blew through the line, and I got to Newark Airport, and I'm trying to find a flight, nothing's getting there, and I said, just whatever you have available car-wise, give it to me, I've got to get out of here. So at about, 8 a.m., we leave Newark Airport in a rental car, and I don't believe I went below 70 the entire way, and at 5:15 I rolled into the Hannibal Industrial Park just minutes after the boat arrived. And if you're not familiar, this building is 1 million square feet under roof, and through the generosity of Mr. Jeffrey Himmel and David Reed, David Reed is the chaplain of the Philadelphia Seamen's Church Institute. He's the general manager of this, or the general manager of this industrial park. He had already prepped this room for our delivery, so much so that they went in and put new lighting. They filled what used to be a pit in with gravel, compacted it. You'll see the yellow crane in the background is a 50-ton crane, so they intentionally put us right beneath it so we could use that at any point in time when we needed it. So this is where we delivered the boat to. So special delivery, This was our next sweat moment. I missed this because I was en route, but were they cutting off extra support scary here to get it through the garage door to get it into the building? So we had measured that, and she was more or less close, but she was snug getting through there. So upon its arrival, we had several accolades. It was nice that the Ohio House of Representatives and the Senate of Ohio recognized the boat coming back to its original home place. So, it was built in 1923, and 96 years later, it's back. It's home in our county. So this was a drone shot of backing the boat in. The trailer actually had air brakes, so it lowered to the ground, and I think they raised up, put the blocks beneath it, all the cribbing, which Gary and them were doing that as I was en route, and as well as some crew members. So you can see how big it is compared to the trailer coming into this building. Another shot. I'm there at that point. So this was the crew. We were done. The boat, we've got it chalked up. The trailer pulled out from under it. This was okay, we're here. We finally made it. There she is. So this is us actually using the crane, and this is as you can see, one of the rudders, and you can get an idea of the scale of the size of the rudders. one of our Rodney Ruffner, he was my go-between. He's on our museum board, so he and Gary did all the coordinating to get the boat here, and our fellow board member Janet Kahn. Between the three of them, while I was en route, they were handling this big problem. So, our thanks is obviously for the museum standpoint, the sons and daughters of Pioneer Rivermen. In 2009, when we first opened, I came to Jeff, asked him what we could do, anything that they could do to help us, and they were gracious enough to loan us quite a bit from their collection that wasn't being on display, and we were able to put that in and really get going. And the J. Mack Gamble Fund as well, the Pittsburgh District Corps of Engineers, and the Hannibal Industrial Park. And last but not least, our many private donors and contributors, some of which are here, who have been beyond generous to me, my family, and the museum. And I can't thank them enough for everything they've done, because they were the ones that helped us get this boat here. They know who they are, and they know how grateful I am to them for that. So with that, I'm going to slide back a couple slides. I have a short video of Hannibal Locks and Dam and sort of the facility. And this video was made possible by a $2,500 grant from the J. Mack Gamble Fund.
For centuries, the Ohio River has been a source of life, commerce, and transportation for the Upper Ohio Valley. The mighty Ohio carves through 6 states over a 981-mile path. Here, in Monroe County, the Ohio River is just as vital to civilization as anywhere else. The river is dotted with a series of locks and dams, controlling water levels and allowing a variety of vessels to pass through. The Hannibal Locks and Dam is just one of those structures, spanning the 1,098-foot wide artery of water and providing safety and security for all of those downstream. The Hannibal Locks and Dam replaced locks 14 and 15, which were the older style wicket dams.
So when it was constructed here, the dam took the place of the wickets, and the lock chambers here, the construction of the dam was started in '65. The lock chambers went into operation in 1973, and the dam was completed roughly in '75, and that's when the project was dedicated.
There are only 2 of the older wicket type dams still left, lock 52 and 53. The background is a sample of the wickets that were raised and lowered to guarantee a 9-foot draft for shipping interest on the Ohio River system. The new locks and dams that we have here now will give you a 12-foot draft between each lock and dam.
With the wicket-style locks becoming obsolete, a new style of locks were necessary to handle the modern types of vessels passing through.
They drew up plans for these new types where they can take tows through in one solid section instead of having to break them in half. And it's also made it possible to cut the time necessary to go through these locks and dams in half.
When construction started on the Hannibal Locks and Dam in 1965, the area where the dam exists was much different.
It took out all of Hannibal between Route 7 and the river, including gas stations, lodge halls, apartments, and many homes. There was nothing left on the river side of State Route 7 going through Hannibal.
Most of the recreational area surrounding the dam was once a wet area, but it now consists of fill from the dredging of the river so it could be expanded for the dam.
Our main mission here is to navigate the pool to make sure that the towing industry has a navigational channel all the way upriver. We try to do things here as safe as we possibly can and make sure that the public's safe when they use the facility, and look out for them.
Within 40 years of operation, the Hannibal Locks and Dam has witnessed several historical vessels pass through it, from submarines to passenger ships.
A number of years ago, we had the submarine Requiem, which brought up the Ohio River. and taken to Carnegie Institute at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I followed this submarine up the river, and the people just come out in groves. The bridge in New Martinsville was lined with cars and people. The river banks. I met the boat originally at Buteau Island Locks and Dams early in the morning at daybreak, and there were people had camped out all night just to get a chance to see this submarine on its way to Pittsburgh.
In a similar fashion to the submarine, a number of World War II vessels have journeyed up the Ohio as well, including the LST-325.
But there were hundreds of them built during World War II at all the inland shipyards at Ambridge, Buteau, Point Pleasant. Any shipyard you could think of was building these identical crafts for use in the Pacific Theater during World War II. And it is always a big draw when it comes up here. It's only been up here twice, but it's very interesting and brings out a lot of people, particularly veterans, come to see this landing craft coming up the Ohio.
Perhaps one of the most notable types of ships to pass through the locks are the large Sternwheelers.
One of the biggest draws along the Ohio River, and that went on for many, many years, we'll start with the Delta Queen. The Delta Queen would come up here sometimes at night or down at night, 11:30, 12 o'clock in the morning. And there would be people coming in to watch the boat go through in baby-doll pajamas, nightgowns. They jump out of bed and they come as they were. Hundreds of people. And there were people that followed it, say from Clarington, Sardis. They would come and converge here in hopes of getting the calliope music. The people of this valley and this community love the steam calliope music that they would get from the Delta Queen. And the same as the Mississippi Queen, but in the American Queen. Of course, the American Queen is newer and hasn't really made that many trips up here. But the old Mississippi Queen made many, many trips. I've been on her many, many times, and has a calliope that is like no other. When you hear it, you would recognize it in an instant.
The newest of the majestic Sternwheelers is the American Queen, which is still in operation today. Her maiden voyage up the Ohio River took place in 1995.
I met the boat at Marietta early on a foggy morning. You could hear the whistle blowing, but you couldn't see the boat. I waited, I videotaped. There were people on the levee, they had bonfires on the levee, and people were waiting on, but we couldn't see nothing. Just all at once, out of the fog, came this monstrous big boat, the American Queen, on its first trip up the river. It had governors on it, had all kinds of dignitaries. And when it came into Hannibal here, I don't know whether I've ever seen that many people in this little community as there was to see the American Queen.
Another unique aspect to the Hannibal Locks and Dam is the attached hydro plant, which is owned and operated by the city of New Martinsville and was added on in the mid-1980s. This is one of the few modern dams to have a hydro plant attached.
They actually take our first 8 feet of water flow that we would be running on the dam, and they run that through their plant through a turbine system to produce electricity, and then they go ahead and put it out on the grid and put it out for sale. Roughly here, the boat that's behind us now is pushing out. That's a commercial towboat. 80% of our commodity here at the lock is coal. It will get bigger with the natural gas drilling going on. There'll be a lot more shale gas locking through here. Our tonnage here, we roughly do about 45,000 tons a year of different cargo.
Around 325 commercial vessels are locked each month at the dam. Along with recreational craft in the summer months, it averages around 1,200 a year.
We lock anything here from jet skis, kayaks, recreational craft, anything like that we lock here.
The locks are guaranteed for at least a half a century, but with the current locks being 40 years old, maintenance work will be a common sight as improvements are made to increase the life of the structure.
Some of the updates that's been done here since I've been working at this project, a lot of our dam controls was all manual. The lock gate chambers, the controls was manual. Everything now is updated to PLCs, programmable logical controllers. So a lot of the dam gates and things are run on computers.
Updates will continue at the dam to help keep it environmentally friendly and structurally sound, guaranteeing many more years of locking and providing safety to the residents of the Upper Ohio Valley.
Wraps up for me. I just wanted to briefly kind of give you an idea of what how the Corps is supportive in our community and why we're having so much success there, and why we're looking to the future there. This is just a prime site, and as a matter of fact, this is the largest. Hannibal Locks and Dam is the largest federally owned piece of property that the Pittsburgh District Corps of Engineers owns. There's over 300 acres there, and they've actually allowed ballpark. We have 2 baseball fields, a practice football field, and now walking trails on the site, as well as a maneuver boat that's a historical exhibit and old wickets from a lock and dam. So the grounds are just prime place for us to build and be there for the future. And the CRESAP will soon be 100 years old, and hopefully 100 more after that. She'll be there for the public to see and see the legacy that not only that we're building here, but many of you in this room have helped us build, including the sons and daughters of Pioneer Rivermen. So my thanks to all of you again. I truly appreciate that.